Hello there and welcome to Stylirish TV, where today we have the great honour to meet the best sculptor in Ireland, Mr. Paddy Campbell.
Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. And so, Mr. Campbell, when did you start feeling the need to express yourself through art?
Well, I always did as a child. I was always drawing and painting and making things. I drew horses and cowboys, but mostly people. I was always interested in drawing people. But that started from a very young age. And then when I went to school, it wasn't very much encouraged. We were talking earlier about visual arts in Ireland not being very important. Literature was more important, poetry and speech and so on. So they were the concentrated, and of course mathematics, because you needed that for to have a job and so on. So art was kind of, you weren't encouraged, and through school, although there were some art courses, it was always regarded as low priority. And when I finished school, it was the thing I was best at. I was even without a teacher, I was better at art than almost anything else. Mm-hmm. But I never got any encouragement. I thought about going to art school, but I could also understand that it was almost impossible to make a living in those days. That was in the 1960s. So I decided to go into business instead. My parents were in bed and breakfast business, so I thought hospitality. So I studied hotel management. And then I started my own business, which was catering, mostly food service catering, contract catering, and so on. And that went very well. I mean, after a very bad start, I have to say, I had a lot of very difficult years, but in the end, it came good. And I was always...
Big success as well.
Yes, it was a very successful business. But I was always, I had this longing to express myself in another way. I have to say I got a lot of satisfaction from business because I was creating something. I was making a new business. I wasn't carrying on something or working in a business that other people had made. This was creative, so it had a certain joy for me, and I don't complain, and I have no regrets that I did it. But then about 15 years ago, I was doing business plans, and I said I should really do a plan for myself. And I asked myself, where do you want to end up? Where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years' time? Because this is what you start with a business plan. You say, where do I want this business to be? What do I want to be doing? And I realised that I didn't want to be behind a desk. I wanted to be expressing myself through art. So I began to take lessons more seriously and going to classes at night and so on. Then I didn't get full satisfaction from that, and I had one son who had studied art and who was living in Glasgow, and I asked him, could he find me a course where I could do, at that time I was just painting and drawing, not sculpture, and where can I go that I can draw and paint every day and do nothing else just for a month? So he found this course in Florence, and I went there, and they were teaching the techniques of Renaissance art, which is very logical, very precise, very well structured, and it was exactly what I wanted. I wanted to learn the techniques of how to paint or draw a person that I was looking at, the way they are, not distorted, not changed in any way, just as they are, but also with their anima, with their soul. Sure. So that I'm expressing not just a photocopy of the person, but something that exudes, I suppose, personality, and also tells you something about them. So I did that for about 8 years. I went to summer courses. Every summer I went to Florence, and I was so happy when I was there. During the winter then I was working in the business mostly, but I began to change the emphasis. At the time I spent at business was becoming less and less. The time I spent in art was becoming more and more. And eventually I got to a situation where I started with, say, 10% art, 90% business, and the whole thing had changed around it in about 10 years. But then one summer I did a sculpture course for a month, and that was to improve my painting. I didn't think I would like sculpture. I didn't think I could sculpt. I didn't think I would. I thought I would be bored, but I felt I need to do this to improve my painting. And much to my surprise, as soon as I started to do sculpture, I realised it was my gift. It was like somebody lifted a veil from my face, and I realised this is my gift, this is my true vocation, talent. And yet I had to learn the technique. You can't just because you have a gift. It's like you have a gift for language, but you still have to learn the grammar. Unfortunately, I know this from trying to learn Italian. I thought I could learn Italian by osmosis, but I had to go back and learn the grammar, which is very, as you know, very difficult.
It is. But I'm sure you're doing great.
I should be doing better. But with sculpture, it's another language, and so I had to learn the grammar of that, the technique of that language before I could really express myself, even though I had lots of ideas and things I wanted to say. So I finished that month, and then I realised this is where my life is taking me. And I went back to Florence and I did a full-time course in sculpture for 3 years. And I learned technique. And at the end of that time, I didn't know everything about sculpture or even that kind of sculpture, but I could make realistic sculptures. And I then found a studio in the centre of Florence, and about 5 or 6 years ago, and I began to work alone and make my own sculptures, and it was just, that's all I wanted to do. That was my life. And so that's how I began to sculpt.
Mm-hmm. So really like a new life, new part of your life, let's say.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And what inspires you to create art?
Well, I love to tell stories, and I'm always watching what's happening around me. Not dramatic things. I don't tell murder stories or war stories or even crime stories. I'm interested in little things that happen in people's lives that mean something to them, and sometimes I'm observing, and I want to reproduce that. And sometimes it's almost subconscious. It's happening subliminally in my mind that that I'm seeing something, or even in a peripheral way. I don't kind of go around staring at people or looking over their shoulders, but I'm absorbing all the time. Mm-hmm. And then when I go to make a sculpture, this often comes back out. And sometimes I'll start with an idea that I want to represent. Other times the idea will evolve in my mind. So it depends really on the situation. But the inspiration usually comes from people and from situations and from things that move me. Mm-hmm. And that means it could make me really happy, it could make me sad, It could make me angry, but it must move me. And therefore the art that I make, if it's to be successful from my point of view, it should move other people. It should make them not necessarily happy, but maybe sad, maybe angry, maybe but an emotional reaction. Let's
say an aesthetic feeling like
yes, this. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I understand. And let's say you are telling me already how an idea is usually developed in your mind, right? And but for example, how much of the creative process occurs during the actual making of the piece, let's say?
A lot. In my case, a lot. And I think I described to somebody that my head is like a big hopper, and I let ideas come into it. I don't necessarily process them very quickly. I don't have a precise idea of what I'm going to come out with usually, so I let the ideas roll around in the hopper, but eventually they come down to a point where the idea comes out the other end as something quite not very precise necessarily, but very concise, very it's not a very chaotic expression at the end. It's very chaotic at the beginning. Sure. And I think that's part of the artistic mind, is being able to embrace this. Also in business, because I was entrepreneurial, I dealt a lot with chaos. I didn't mind if there were lots of problems, lots of confusion, because my gift in business was to be able to bring some order into that, and then produce something that perhaps people wanted to buy, or a service that people needed. But I didn't start with a precise idea. I'm not an engineer, I'm not an accountant, I'm a different kind of person. And I think the artistic mind is generally like that, but mine works very much on the base of a hopper, narrowing down. So during the process of making something, I'm looking again. I focus, but I don't wear blinkers. You understand? So I'm if something occurs to me that a better idea than the one I have, I try to bring it in. For example, when I was making the statue of the mother and child, the mother feeding the baby, there was one moment that she was holding the baby like this, and she had her hand under the baby's head. And one moment I saw her and this was from life. I was working with a real person, with a real mother, a real baby. But one moment she was stroking the baby's head very tenderly, and I loved that moment so much that I changed the position of the hand in the sculpture so that she was just touching the baby's head, and it's a moment that a lot of, particularly mothers, relate to very much. I've seen people looking at the sculpture and crying, and I'm not a woman, I'm not a mother, but something in that, something in me is able to communicate with the person, with the other person. And I think that I have an ability to get inside the skin of the other person and relate to the emotions that are going on inside them as well. And and somehow I can bring that out in the sculpture. I believe I have that gift. And it's not nothing that it is a gift. Somebody has given it to me. It's not something I made up myself, but I love being in that moment.
Mm-hmm. I understand. When you were working on the small world, like the kind of dynamism that is in this kind of composition remind me, for example, of the piece that I was telling you before of Niccolò dell'Arca that we have down in Bologna, for example. And for you, it is this like, let's say, putting on scene a part of the real world.
Yes, yes. It's a moment in life. And I like to think, for example, if it's a party that's going on in a room, that it's just one moment, and somebody described it as freeze frame, and I think it's a good description that you just, but you have to imagine that there's something that has been going on, and there's something that's going to continue going on, but you just are allowed to glimpse for a moment into that room and see all the different things that are happening to different people. And usually, even at something like a party, which is very sociable, but people are still in their own little worlds, and they're usually involved in some little bubble, maybe with one or two other people, but not with everybody in the room. So I try to, when I'm at a party, for example, I'm not studiously studying this, but I'm absorbing things that are going on around me, and then when I begin to produce a sculpture, things start to come back to me, and it's part of the story making. I'm constructing a story, and I try and link the stories together, and maybe there's a little bit of irony in it. For example, sometimes it's a party, but people don't seem to be very happy. They should be happy. It's La Festa.
It's La Festa.
but they somehow but because they're absorbed in their own world, they don't actually feel this, that we have to be happy. If they're not, they're not. And very often there's what do they say, aggravation or friction between people that's brought about. For example, if it's a children's party and something is happening on the table and somebody spills something, it's an accident, but it creates all sorts of ricochets and repercussions for other people.
Sure.
It shouldn't, but and it takes away from the happiness, but a moment like that can do something that wasn't intended. So I'm looking all the time at those moments that even create embarrassment for somebody, and you know, we all have been at a party or in a situation where we've been embarrassed by something, and you cringe, but I like to provide an opportunity for people to look in to somebody else's life as a kind of voyeur, to say, oh, I know exactly how that person feels. I remember that happening to me, and or to somebody else, and feeling, oh, I hope I never see that again. But I try and produce those moments again.